my screen again.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Good part.
It is so good to see so many of my colleagues. I miss seeing you all in person and on campus, but this is where we are, I guess. So we're gonna have to do it this way, and so hopefully we can have some fun today and maybe challenge your deepest convictions. We'll see. Um, So I'm going to start out with a few questions, and they're simple yes or no questions, perhaps. The first one is, do you believe that there are real and meaningful benefits for your courses for students? Benefits that will last beyond the end of the semester or graduation, not just for one term, but maybe for the rest of their lives? Two, can you and do you communicate those benefits to the students in ways that they can understand and understand the value for their lives? And how much academic jargon do you use when you're talking to them about this? Do you speak in the language of student learning outcomes or maybe in a language that they might understand? Three, can you convince your students that they will obtain those benefits if they do the activities and work that you have so carefully laid out for them? That is, can you convince them of the effectiveness of your pedagogy? And fourth, and perhaps most importantly, do you trust your students to appreciate these benefits, believe you about your pedagogy, and then choose which benefits they want to earn based on their own self-interest? That is, do you trust your students? These are really serious questions, perhaps the most important questions that we can ask ourselves as teachers, and I hope that you say yes to all of them. I've had so many conversations, enough conversations with you and other colleagues to know that we all have lofty goals for our courses and believe strongly in the value of our disciplines and our knowledge and the skills that students can get in our classes. And so if you answered yes to all four of those questions, then the good news is that you don't have to play the game of school. So do you know about the game of school that you and your students are playing probably right now? The rules of the game influence students' motivations, their performance, and their academic self-esteem. And the rules of the game of school are largely unwritten, but widely understood. And they're very simple. There really are just two rules to the game of school. And the first rule is to obey the professor, right? This is a rule that students learn very quickly and a rule that we enforce in many different ways. And the second rule to the game of school is that the highest grade wins. I'm sorry, highest grade wins, right. So that's it. I mean, there are only two rules, really. And notice that in these rules, there is nothing in there about chemistry or Cleopatra or communication or critical thinking. It's just obedience and grades. But mastering the game of school, learning about obedience and grades, does not appear in any student learning outcomes that I've ever seen. But students are very smart to pay attention to the game of school because that's the way the system of higher education works. Right? We record grades, not learning. We calculate GPAs, not mastery. We count up credits, not how much we have improved our students' lives. Now, we know from decades of research that grades do not motivate students. They really only motivate students to do just enough work, not their best work. And grades don't measure learning in any objective way. And we know that there are lots of biases that creep into our grading processes. But we do know that grades do cause lots of anxiety in our students, right? And we know that when we're grading our students, this turns us really into cops, right? We have to police our students to make sure that they are doing things and make sure that they are not cheating or somehow engaging in something that we think is a violation of our rules. And we also, when we do grade students, we institute a severe fear of failure, right? So when students know they're being graded, they have to worry about not failing, because that's going to have a serious consequence for their grade, which is so important. But we know that failure is, in fact, one of the most valuable learning experiences that there is, and that, really important learning happens when we fail and we look back on that failure, reflect on it, and move on and improve. And we know that grading takes a lot of the joy out of what we do and what the students do. It really kills their joy. And that joy, if we reflect on our own most significant learning experiences, whether it was when we were students or when we were learning anything else, at least I know that those significant learning experiences for me included a lot of joy. And grading really is really the death of joy. And we also know that when we give grades and feedback, what students pay attention to, unfortunately, is just the grade. How many times have you seen this in your courses? All that feedback, all that time, all that effort you put into giving them feedback, and students just ignore it, and they pay only attention to the grades. And that's very frustrating. So I'm here to tell you that there's a better way. A way that prioritizes our real student learning outcomes, a way that respects our students as whole persons, in a way that shifts our relationship with students from overseers to facilitators and mentors. And all we have to do is stop putting grades on student work. And this is called ungrading. So, how do you ungrade? Well, it's easy. No more grades. No more scores. No more points. And no more requirements. Instead, it's all feedback. You already give a lot of feedback already to your students, I'm sure, whether it's on exams or papers or in class. You already give a ton of feedback. All you got to do is stop putting a score or a grade on that as well. So some people think that you can take small steps in your ungrading. You can, for example, ungrade an assignment or ungrade a test or ungrade an activity in some way. But this has not been my practice. When I have ungraded my courses, the way I've done it is basically I've done it in the full ungrading style. It just doesn't make sense to me to tell students that this one part of the class is going to be ungraded and tell them why it's going to be ungraded and maybe explain to them the benefits of ungrading, but then turn around and say, well, the rest of the course is going to be graded, and thus you must do what I say because I said it, and I'm going to grade you on those things. So in my practice, I have really jumped in with 2 feet. Maybe that's just who I am, but the more I thought about ungrading, and I didn't do it, I didn't move to ungrading immediately when I first heard about ungrading. I really thought about it for, I don't know, several semesters, I think, and really read more about it. And the more I read, the more convinced I became of its value. And so eventually I just made the switch to the full ungrading method. But some people say you can do it in small pieces, so perhaps that's something you want to try. And I should say that there are other styles of designing a course that are consistent with the ungrading philosophy that work in slightly different ways. Some things like contract grading is another example, and we have people on this campus who do contract grading, or labor-based grading, that's another one. So there are alternatives that are not quite the full ungrading model, but are also consistent with it. So that's an option. So in my courses now, and this is true of every course I teach, and I teach Intro to Psychology, which is, an introduction course that oftentimes is taken by first semester freshmen. And I teach middle level courses, and I teach a senior capstone course this way. I don't teach graduate courses, but I teach at every level of undergrad, and I teach online as well. And so in my courses, nothing is required. Everything is optional. It's all feedback. There are no points. There are no grades. And students choose what to do in my courses based on the benefits that I tell them they can get from those activities. And I spend a lot of time in my courses explaining what those benefits are. This is consistent with the transparency in teaching and learning, or TILT, that many other people on this campus have talked about a lot. That part of being transparent is explaining to students why they're doing things. So I explain to my students what the benefits of reading the book are, of doing all the activities that I've created for them, and I have all the same activities that I used to have, and more actually. And I say, these are all the possibilities, these are all the options, and here is why you might want to do this thing. This is the benefit of doing, and I have quizzes in some of my classes. Here are the benefits. Oh, here's why you might want to take a quiz. Here's why you might want to work in a group. Here's why you might want to write this paper or do this activity. There's a reason for all those things. And I explain to my students what those reasons are, and then I trust them to choose what to do based on what benefits they know they can get from doing those activities. So I know you have some questions now, because I've talked about ungrading enough to know that you have some questions in your mind. Let me try to anticipate some of your questions. One of the first ones is, what about the university requirements, right? So here at EKU, we are required to turn in at least midterm grades and final grades, right? And we're just turning in midterm grades right now, and as well as the progress reports from the 4-week progress reports. And that's the same true for eCampus as well. eCampus has the same requirements. So how do I handle that if there are no grades, no points, no scores? I used to have, at times, very sophisticated formulas that students could use to calculate their grade based on all the points and scores and all the grades that they had in my classes. And I used to have a lot of points and scores and grades. But now I don't do that at all. And instead, students tell me their grade and why. And I can tell you, in some of my classes, students tell me what their grade is and why in writing. And those pieces of student work are some of the most gratifying, most meaningful student work that I read all semester. It really requires them to reflect on the benefits that they've gotten out of my course, what they've done to earn those benefits. Students are brutally honest in these things in my experience, and I really learn a lot about my students in that way. In other courses, I've now started having individual one-on-one consultations with students, both for the midterm and for the final grade. So we get together for 15 minutes one-on-one, and we talk about, for the midterm, how the class is going, what they've gotten out of my class. I'm just having these today. Yesterday I did, I think, 21 of those. And so it got to be a lot, but even at the very end of it, it was still a fascinating conversation to have with students. And again, it's that reflection that is really valuable. We know that from a metacognitive point of view, reflection is a very valuable activity for students, and it's one that I think students don't do enough of on their own, and we don't ask students to do enough, at least I didn't before. So again, these interactions with students that I have are incredibly meaningful. And what I tell my students, and this is a promise I make to them, is that with very few exceptions, whatever grade they tell me is the grade that they're going to get, whether it's their midterm grade or their final grade. And the only exceptions to that is if they don't tell me their grade for some reason, they don't do that, then I'm going to have to submit an F because I don't know what else to put because I don't have any other grades to look at. And so that also gets them to do this because they don't want to get an F. And really the only other exception is if I think they've given themselves a grade that is too low, then I reserve the right to give them a higher grade. And I haven't done that often, but I have done it on just a few occasions. But I have to say that students are, again, pretty brutally honest in even their grade submissions. So really, not your first two questions, because your first two questions was about university, but your next two questions are right now, I'm guessing, won't students do nothing if there are no requirements and everything is optional? And won't all students say they deserve an A in the class if it's totally up to them? And I'm promising them that I will give them whatever grade they submit. And I can tell you that the answer to those two questions is pretty important. So students will do nothing, especially if they don't think there's any benefit to doing that thing. And part of the challenge for me of ungrading is to trust students to make that judgment. At least they're making it in my classes in an informed way because I'm explaining to them what the benefits are of doing those activities, and I'm trying to convince them that I know enough about pedagogy to feel pretty confident that they will get those benefits if they do those things. But students actually might decide that they don't want to earn that benefit. And if they don't, I trust that they've made an informed choice, and that's okay with me. I would also say that in my classes where I used to have requirements that were not ungraded, my guess is that students also didn't really, if they thought about them, they might not have wanted the benefits that were there in my mind because I wasn't so clear about the benefits when I used to teach my courses. And so they might not have wanted to get those benefits either, but they just did what I required them to do because they were afraid of the consequences of not doing it for their grade. That is, they understand the first rule of the game of school, which is obey what I say. So I don't think they were probably getting the benefits that I thought they were getting anyway. They were just satisfying the requirements. But now in my classes, students can choose what they want to do based on what benefits they want to get. And if they don't want to get those benefits, they don't do those activities, and that's okay with me. Won't they all request an A? I can tell you that they certainly have not done that in my classes. I've now taught, I think 2 years of ungraded classes, and never once have I had an entire class say they want an A. And in fact, I've looked at my grade distributions in my ungraded classes compared to how I taught those classes before, and the grade distributions are not drastically different. Now, perhaps you could look at my grade distributions and accuse me of giving too many high grades. That's a whole other conversation that I'd be delighted to have. But what I can tell you, and again, I'm just having these meetings with seniors in a capstone course, and they are submitting, or they're telling me what their midterm grade is. And I've had, at least 4 or 5 people say they deserve a C for their midterm grade, a whole bunch of Bs, and a bunch of As. Now, no one has proposed a D or an F, And frankly, if they propose a D or an F, I would see that as a failure on my part, not theirs. And I understand these are midterm grades and they're not the final ones, but the final grades in my ungraded classes are about the same. There really are students who, again, they've had the experience of telling me their midterm grade and me giving them that grade, so they know that I'm serious about this. This is not a trick. I'm not going to pull a fast one on them. And so they know that their final grade can be anything that they want it to be, anything that they tell it to be. And so people tell me that they deserve, that their final grade is a B and a C. And again, I don't think I've had someone tell me a D or an F, but that's good. I hope that no one is going to get a D or an F in my class. That's my fault, not theirs, most often. Or at least that's how I see it. So students don't just claim grades that we might say are not deserved. At least that's not my experience. So just let's review quickly, and then I want to have time for the rest of your questions. The benefits of ungrading, as I see them, it's a lot less anxiety for our students. We become their champion, their facilitator, their mentor, their colleague, and not their police officer, not their overseer, not their enforcer. I don't want to be any of those things. We can return joy to our classroom. Students report to me in my ungraded classes that, what they do because they're interested in it. They're fascinated by the topic, and so they get to explore things that they, with this kind of joyous attitude that they don't have in their other classes. And finally, and I think this is really important, there will be trust in my classroom. I trust them and they trust me. And I think that is a really important component to, any educational experience. And so those things, especially during a pandemic, but I would argue even after our pandemic is over, whenever that is, are all really important. Really important for students to have meaningful, valuable learning experiences in my classes, in any class. So what about eCampus? I haven't talked about eCampus, and this is an eCampus thing. So I guess what I would ask is, who are eCampus students? In my experience, and I've been teaching in eCampus for a long time now, eCampus students are different than Campus One students. Not always, but in general, my experience is that they are highly motivated, right? These are people who have come back usually to higher education from whatever they were doing. And so they are really here to learn. They are really motivated to do well, to get something out of this experience. And so they're a joy to work with because they are so motivated. They have a lot of life experience that they bring to our courses, that whether it's from work experience or family or lots of areas in general. So they have all this breadth of knowledge that they can bring to our class. They also do have lots of other commitments and obligations that they have to pay attention to that they can't ignore. And that's why they're coming back to school in an online format. So they're only taking 2 classes at a time because they have jobs or family obligations or other obligations that they can't ignore, they have to pay attention to. And importantly, hopefully at least, they've forgotten the rules of the game of school, right? I mean, I think sometimes when I've worked with eCampus students, they've talked about, having to transition back into higher education and remember how that works. And I think some of that is them relearning this game of obedience and grades. And what a shame that is, that they have to relearn that, because again, I have no interest in teaching them about obedience. I have no interest in getting them to focus on scores or points or grades. That's not the student learning outcomes in my courses. And so I would say that eCampus students are really the ideal students for ungrading, because they're really super motivated, by themselves. They come in with a lot of motivation, and maybe they've forgotten the rules of the game of school, so we could just skip over that part and ease their transition back into higher education and just talk about the exciting, interesting parts and get them to focus on the learning and not the skills, or not the scores or points. So just to go back to my first important 4 questions, right? Do you believe that there is a meaningful and valuable point to your courses for your students? Do you think you can communicate those important value and meaningful skills and knowledge that they can get from your course? Can you convince them that your pedagogy is sound? And finally, importantly, do you trust your students to make adult informed decisions about the benefits that are available to them in your course? And again, if you say yes, and I hope you do, then we can stop grading. And we can stop playing the game of school. And instead, we can start to ungrade, where students have less anxiety, you are their champion, they're filled with joy about learning, and there's trust in your classroom. And that, I think, is the experience that we all want to have with our students. Thank you. I should say that there are some resources that I can suggest if you want to learn more about ungrading. There is an excellent book that just came out last year about ungrading, published by West Virginia Press. It's really great. Jesse Stommel has been a champion of ungrading for more than 20 years. He's got a great blog. And Alfie Cohn has done a lot of really interesting research about, research about the effect of scores and grades on students' motivation and performance and self-esteem and all the rest. So he's got a great homepage that has a lot of resources on there. So I would encourage you to look at those things. Okay, I see that there have been a lot of questions in the chat, which I have not been paying attention to. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to try to look at these questions.
You're good to go. They just started appearing like 2 minutes ago. So we can start with Melanie. Yeah.
Good. So let me scroll up and see what the questions are. So let's go up to Melanie. Would Matthew be willing to share an example of his syllabus or whatever documentation you use to formalize the ungradedness of your classes? Absolutely. I'm happy to share all of that. I should say some of that is actually on my blog. I've got a blog that if you've ever gotten an email from me, that there's a link to my blog in the bottom of my email, but I'm happy to provide that as well. But with Nadim's permission, I will give him some samples of the things I do. I do have some language in my syllabus about this. I also have several other documents that I think are really important that both explain ungrading, but also talk about, well, there's something that I call an engagement plan. So because there are no requirements in my course, students sometimes feel adrift. They don't know what they should be doing. So I've developed this document that really tries to lay out for them all the activities that that are available to them and the benefits of those activities. And then it asks them to make a plan for what they think they want to do. And in some courses, I really talk about this plan in terms of, this is how I do it in my Introduction to Psychology course with sort of brand new students. I say, look, there are maybe 3 different levels of benefit you could get from my class. There is the sort of minimal level, right? So if you are, just looking for the sort of minimal benefit that you can get from my class, here's what I suggest you do. You do these few things. If you want to get sort of the standard benefit from my class, then you should do this other selection of activities. And if you want the maximum benefit, and I try to really play up all the benefits that they possibly could get about, I use all this language about changing their life and, all that stuff, then they should do all these things. And then it's up to them to decide sort of which level of benefit they want to get, and I tell them that they can switch between levels as much as they want, right? So if one week they have more time for my class, but then something else happens in their life or their other classes and they need to drop down to a lower level, that's fine. And so it's all up to them. But I think that engagement plan is also a really valuable activity. So I'll add that as well. So absolutely, Melanie, I'm happy to do that. Carl, hey, Carl. What types of assignments are an option for my students in ungraded classes? Quizzes, group work, written assignments, presentations. Do you find yourself giving less total feedback? These are good questions. So, really, I don't think I've taken away any activities when I've ungraded. I have all the same activities I had before. Presentations, exams, written assignments, papers, quizzes. I haven't had, big tests in my classes for a long time, so I don't have any of those. But yeah, I think, anything is available. And, for example, in my Introduction to Psychology class, there are probably a third of the students who are, and in that class I have quizzes. It's a Monday and Wednesday class. There are quizzes that they could take. I tell them to take them either before or after class every day. So there are like 24 quizzes or something. And I have students who have taken every quiz up to this point. But I have other students who haven't taken any. And that's okay too. And so I assume that they're doing something else and some other combination of things. So really any activity is possible, even presentations. And I think that there is an opportunity to use social pressure in a good way in our courses. So that's how presentations have worked in my courses. I'm saying, do you want to give a presentation about this thing? And hopefully they have chosen to investigate a topic or an idea that is of interest to them, because it's optional after all. And so if they've done something that they're interested in, then it's not surprising that they would want to talk about it and share it with the group and learn from other people's presentations. And so once some people say they're going to give a presentation, then there's kind of that social pressure to give a presentation as well. But again, students don't like giving presentations, I think, when they're required to give a presentation about something that they don't care about very much. And then I have gotten really bad presentations that are, hard to watch, and I bet uncomfortable to give, and probably not a great learning experience for the student either. But the presentations I get in ungraded classrooms, have been, creative. And again, there's no grade, so students can feel more adventurous, that they can take a chance and try something that they might not try otherwise. And I think that's a really good part about ungrading. Group work is a challenge. In my class that I'm teaching right now, my senior class, I talk about the benefits of group work a lot. And I talk about, how in their life after graduation, Dr. Weiss, they're going to be working in groups in their jobs. That's just how jobs work. And I'm like, if you don't like working in groups now, well, you better figure out how to work in groups, because that's going to be your life in the future. So let's try to figure out a way to do it in this class so that it's a benefit and not just a terrible thing. Mixed results, I would say. There are definitely students who are so used to working on their own that they just don't want to engage in a group. And I think they've had lots of bad experiences with groups in the past, of course. And I've been responsible for too many bad group experiences in my courses in the past. So I know that students have been burned. And so it doesn't surprise me that they're reluctant. But, I'm trying to push what I think the benefits are of working in groups. So that's a real challenge, certainly. Thanks, Carl, for that question. Those are good points. And hello, Anne. I'm doing this in my social work graduate class and it relates to the content students. I also love movement away from grades. Completely agree with you. I'm not surprised. Anne has been part of, we have a professional learning community about ungrading that we did last year and it's going on right now. So Anne's no stranger to that. Do you have any more insights about how students measure their own level of excellence? What reference point do they use? have you found success in helping students to push their self-perceived boundaries and their expertise? Um, yeah, this is a great question because, again, students are so well versed in this game of school that they are just, what they are expecting is for me to tell them that, right? Here's where you are. Here's where you are compared to other students, or here's where you are in some objective mastery evaluation. I don't know exactly what that means, but it's hard for students to figure that out. And I keep on going back to the benefits, and I have a lot of benefits, a lot of privilege in my position as a full professor, so I can take all the risks I want. I understand that not everyone has that benefit. I also teach psychology, and I don't teach graduate school, right? So graduate classes. So the consequence of not mastering all the material in my course is nothing, right? I mean, no one's going to. I was just talking with some nursing colleagues last week. Of course, they have a totally different situation that they're in, right? Someone actually might die if those students don't master that material. I'm not in that position. So I talk about it in terms of just the benefits that my students can get for their life, right? I mean, psychology, in my mind, is, well, I guess probably you think the same thing about your discipline, but I strongly believe that my courses have the potential for changing our students' lives and improving their lives in meaningful ways that can be long lasting. And that's my goal. And that's how I talk to them about the outcome of my class. And I don't know how to evaluate that. I don't know how to assess that. I guess other than following them around and 5 years later trying to contact them and say, hey, you remember anything about that class you took with Dr. Winslow? And I'm not sure I want to do that, but I mean, it would be fascinating. I'd like to know that, I guess. But that's really the outcome that I care about. And if they can reflect on that and tell me that that's happened for them, then it's a win for me. And I think it's a win for them. And then their grade in my class is the thing that I care about the least. I mean, I really don't care about their grade, and I tell them that. The thing I care about are the benefits, and that's all I focus on, and that's all I want them to focus on. But they do, this idea of obedience assumes respect for my expertise beyond the formal authority to give a grade. I'm a white male, and so I have all that privilege as well, and so I understand that. I am benefiting from that privilege when my students come and see this old white guy. Then all that privilege obtains. So for other students, other faculty, I get that that's maybe not as easy, and you may have to do some work to establish your expertise. But actually for a while I was like, I'm going to have to spend a lot of time talking about the research on pedagogy. Here's why I'm saying that taking a quiz will help you remember stuff. It's because look at all this research. And of course, we're a science and psychology, and that's a topic actually in psychology learning. So I could weave that in there, but what I found is that students start to gloss over when I start talking about that. But that could be something that if I didn't think they were respecting my expertise, I could call upon if I needed to. I'm trying to get through these as fast as possible here. Allison, in your experience, has ungrading reduced the number of students who disappear over the course of the semester? Do you have fewer FN grades? It's so hard to say that the pandemic has screwed everything up, right? I mean, so I don't know the answer to that really, because there's so many confounding variables in the time that I've been ungrading. A lot of it, half of it's been during the pandemic. So I don't really know. I don't really know for sure because, students have been just dropping out because of the pandemic. I can tell you that the in-person consultations I've had, I think have been valuable in that respect because, students really are heard. Obviously, I'm paying attention to just them during that session, so I think that might help keep them engaged in that class. I'm not doing that in my introductory psychology class, which is probably where I need to do it the most, because those students are at most risk for not retaining. So I should probably do it there, and maybe I'll do it for the final grade. We'll see. But I hope that's true, and I think it should be true, because I do think that students are sometimes bamboozled and frustrated by the game of school, right? And what every student has to do at the beginning of the semester is come into a class, look at that syllabus, and figure out what the game of school rules are for this class. In this class it's participation, this class it's tests, this class it's papers, it's a different thing for every class. And they got to figure all that out, and it's overwhelming for a lot of our students who are first-gen students. They don't know these games, this game of school quite as well yet, and so I don't know of any evidence on that, any research on that. But if I had to guess, in a very biased way, I would say yes, it's going to help with that. But we'll see. That's a great question. Melanie, do courses need to be listed as ungraded per the registrar? This is another one of those questions about, can you get away with ungrading? So what Jesse Stommel would tell you is that you should look very carefully at your contract as a professor, as well as all of the policies that we have that govern what we do as instructors. I can tell you that I have not done that. I'm taking a leap of faith here, and again, didn't start ungrading until I was a full professor. So what are you going to do to me? Don't tell anybody I said that. But I am telling EKU the grades, right? I'm doing everything that's required by EKU. The 4-week progress reports, I asked my students, what should I put down for your 4 weeks progress report? Here are the options. For a midterm grade, students tell me their grades and I turn them in. Final grades, I turn them in. So I think once that I've satisfied those requirements on a transcript, my course looks like any other course, right? It has the name of the class and a grade. And so I don't think I need to tell the registrar what I'm doing, because I don't tell the registrar what I was doing before either, right? I never told the registrar how many exams I had or how many books I used in my class or what I did during class periods. I didn't tell the registrar any of that stuff, so I don't think I need to tell the registrar this either, as long as I am satisfying those requirements of submitting a grade. So that is my asking for forgiveness, not permission approach. We'll see how that works out. So far, so good. What if they just show up for the midterm final interview? That's a good question. So what's the worst case scenario? Is the worst case scenario that students don't get anything out of my class? Because that's the worst case scenario for me. The worst case scenario for me is not that a student gets a grade that they, by some measure, don't deserve. Has that happened in my ungraded classes? Probably. I mean, I'm not sure what metric you would use to make that evaluation. Like you could look at the evidence of things that they've done, and what if they haven't done anything? And some things I can see evidence of, like on Blackboard. Some things I can't. Do I know if they've read the book? Not always. They could have read the book totally on their own, not done anything else, and they show up in the midterm and the final and say, I deserve an A. And they may have actually learned a ton, and I don't know. So if they have done nothing, I guess my perspective on that is that that's my mistake. That's my failing, because I've not convinced them of the value of my course. And I'm not convinced them that they can get that value by doing the things I've laid out to them. And so maybe they've just decided to blow my class off because Well, it's because if it's because I have not convinced them of the value of my course, again, that's my failing. I mean, are there students who would listen to that, and even if other students are convinced, if they're not convinced? What would happen if I mean, what did happen to those students when I used to do it in the graded fashion? What happened to those students probably was, they just did the minimal amount that they had to do in order to maybe pass the class, and maybe they got a D, and they didn't learn anything really, and then that D is going to negatively impact their grade point average and maybe have terrible consequences. And I'm not interested in that. And so now, if they tell me that they get a C or a B or even an A, they still learned about the same amount. They still got the same benefit that they would have got in my graded version of that class. Now they're just not as stressed out about it, and their grade point average isn't as decimated as it was if they had gotten an F or a D. So the worst case scenario, I think, is really only bad for the student. And that's a serious thing to me. I don't want students to leave my course without any benefit. And I have failed them if that happens. On the other hand, what I would say is they may have things going on in their life that I don't know about. Right? And those things may have impacted their performance in my class, and they may have wanted to do more, but they may have been unable to. It's the pandemic, or it's finances, they're homeless, they're food insecure, all those things that we know are happening in our students. And so in my graded versions of my classes, those students were still having those things happening, plus they were stressed out about my course. Plus they were struggling to do something, to do anything to check off that box so that they could get maybe a good grade, a good enough grade to maybe stick around. Maybe they can keep their scholarship or their financial aid, and they're worried about that. And if they're worried about all those things in my class, they're not worried about learning what I'm trying to teach them, right? They're not focused on the benefits. So I'd rather not stress them out like that. So if students just show up for the final or the midterm grade and tell me something without doing anything else, that's a sad thing. And I'm really sad about that. And it's a failing on my part. And I try not to let that happen, but that happened. That did happen, I'm sure, in my graded classes. And I should say that I taught most of my career with points and grades and scores and all that stuff. And so that was happening in my classes before, just with added stress. So that's the way I think about it. Melanie, is ungraded something between the faculty member and his or her course? I think that's true, right? So I don't need to tell the registrar. I don't need to tell even my chair who is on this call. Hello, boss. But I have told him about it, so it's not a big deal. But so yeah, I think it's between the students and me. That's how I think about it. Do I have attendance requirements to keep them from not bothering? Let me just say that everything is optional in my class. And so I know that EKU has attendance policy, I guess. I'm going to claim ignorance about that policy. Can I get away with that? Is that possible? Actually, in most of my ungraded classes, I don't take attendance. But in some classes, like my introductory psychology class, I tell them that I pay attention to who's showing up for things, and if they want to talk about how often they have shown up for things when they are telling me about their grade and why, that's a legitimate thing to say, so that they know that they can factor that in. That can be evidence that they can marshal in support of their grade. So again, I'm trying to put it back on the benefit of coming to class. But again, they can choose. And again, our students have lots of reasons for not wanting or not being able to come to class. especially during the pandemic, but even otherwise. And so I don't want to penalize students if they have things going on in their life that make it difficult for them to come to class. I just want to tell them about what I think the benefits are of coming to class. And I basically leave it at that. Have I experienced any pushback from colleagues or administration? How much have you put into transition to grade? Oh, how much work? So two different questions from Randy. Thanks for that, Randy. I've not experienced any pushback. My former chair and my current chair have both been very supportive of my ungrading. I've talked about it with my dean, and she has been supportive of ungrading. I don't think I've actually had a conversation with the provost about it, but the future provost I have talked about it with. So I've not gotten any pushback from any administrator about ungrading. In fact, I've gotten the opposite of that. The people I've told about it have been excited about it and happy about it. The pushback I get about ungrading comes from faculty. So when I talk to faculty about it, faculty have questions about it, like these questions that you have, like the questions I anticipated in my presentation. And it's a scary thing to ungrade. And your second question, Randy, it's a lot of work, actually. It's a lot of work up front to prepare your course in this way, in some ways. It's a lot of work at the beginning of the semester to explain ungrading to students. I've got to take a bunch of class time to explain how this is going to work and to get students to really understand and believe that it's true. That's work. And then the feedback I give students in place of scores, or to the exclusion of scores or points, that takes work. Although, I give maybe more feedback than I did before, but not a lot. But what I can tell you is, and this is one of the most commonly talked about benefits of ungrading amongst people who do it, is that now when I look at student work, it's a totally different mindset. Instead of looking at student work for places where I can take points off, I look at student work for looking for the good things that they do and try to be encouraging about those good things. And I still point out things I think they can do better, right? This is where you can do better on this. This is the part that was really great. If there are things, but here's where you could do better. And students can always turn things in again. Why not? I mean, there are no points involved. So, they can still turn things in if they want to get the benefit of getting that feedback and revising it and getting better. And I talk about the benefits of doing that a lot. But how many times I used to think of grading papers especially as, this burden. Okay, I've got a big stack, or I've got a big, on Blackboard, I've got a whole screen full of papers that I have to grade, and I've got a rubric, and I'm going to have to go through, and I'm looking for this thing and clicking on stuff, and then I've got to give some feedback to, it's exhausting. It was exhausting for me. And now when I read student work, it is, to say that I'm looking forward to it is maybe a little too strong, but not a lot. And I look forward to it a lot more than I did when I used to be grading people's work. That was drudgery at times, and painful. And, again, I really remember having this feeling of, this paper is not an A paper, it's a B paper, I think. And so where can I take it off enough points so that they get a B score? What a terrible, terrible way to think about student work. I'm so embarrassed. I'm so ashamed of thinking about it that way for so long, because there's just a better way of doing it. And it's a way that really, again, it just switches my attitude and my relationship with students to being much more of a mentor, a facilitator, an encourager, a champion, really, for students. And that just feels so much better to me. So that's a big thing. Richard, my chair, thank you, says, I find Matt's argument completely persuasive. I really can't imagine an effective cardinal argument. I will say again, when I was talking to nursing, I wasn't talking about ungrading in particular, but, if you are teaching students who really, pre-med, or it's a class where students they need to know the content in order to pass some licensing thing, perhaps, or in our graduate programs, if they're going to be going out and giving people therapy, they got to know this stuff. On the other hand, what I would say is, I can't imagine students having a stronger motivation than those students, right? I mean, they know that they have to pass this licensing exam, and if they don't, they can't become a nurse, which is what they've been working so hard on for how long and paid all this money for, and what their dream is. They should really be so motivated to learn this material, much more than someone in a psychology class who's in it for, just for fun, maybe. It's their gen ed class, or it's an elective, perhaps. So they should have all the intrinsic motivation that they need to try to really master that material. What's the point of adding on a bunch of stress and a bunch of anxiety about scores and points? Give them feedback. Tell them, you don't know this well enough. Absolutely. You need to master this better than you have it now. Absolutely. But a grade or a score or some formula to calculate I just think that's it's still not a good argument. Although, again, if they have to master anatomy, I get it. But they know that. And if you're transparent about it, then they can use that as their motivation. Carl, thank you. I appreciate you being here, trying to get through these. In terms of group work, do you still have students grade themselves? I don't really assess their participation in groups. I assess really the outcome of that group work. I don't really assess it, but that's what I say the value is. I do think there's value in the process of doing group work. And so I ask them to reflect on it. How did the group work? And I ask them, hey, how did the group work for you? What can we do to make the groups work better? Were there people doing weird things? Was it a communication problem? So I try to talk about group work and how to make that more beneficial, but I don't assess it really. I get them to reflect on it, but not assess it. Ozan, are there any peer-reviewed publications that run randomized trials to show the effectiveness of ungrading or lack thereof? So I don't know of good studies that really look at ungrading in particular. There are a whole bunch of studies that are about grading itself. So Alfie Kohn has done a bunch of research, and other people have done a bunch of research where they compare students who receive scores and grades on some things. I don't know if they've done it with the entire courses or not, but Alfie Kohn would be the person I would point you towards. His website's got a lot of good research. I'm not sure that, subtle research is hard to do, especially with a randomized, controlled. Certainly double blind is not going to happen, right? So I don't think a gold standard is going to be possible. I think it's hard for most education research to be truly the gold standard, but Alfie Kohn's where I would point you towards. He's the person I would say to look at. Al's good answer. Thanks for your answer, Matt. The pandemic definitely confounds things. Yeah. Thanks. I agree with you. Students should be a lot less discouraged, a lot less stressed out. I don't know what you were laughing at Anne. Something funny, I hope. Give you a medal for being a great teacher. Well, I don't know. Maybe. Constantly struggle with what is good enough. We are moving away from routinized approach of robot can do rubrics. Yeah. An LMS is a great thing in some ways, but if you think about an LMS to its final extreme, a robot can do it, right? I don't know what we're required for. If everything you do is within the LMS, what do they need us for? So ungrading is really saying we are important and our relationships with students are important, and putting the focus back on their benefits and connection and engagement. That's where we can play a role that the LMS and AI is never going to be able to do, or at least it's going to be harder for them to do. We're going to extend our careers if we can focus on those things. Who knows what the future will hold? Do they write papers? Do they try to improve them? Absolutely. Feedback and revision is a big part of my process. Totally. And again, you have to convince students that revision is not just a good thing, it's the way, I say this all the time, everything that's good that they've ever consumed is the product of group work and revision, right? Every movie, every song, everything that they've read, everything that they've encountered that's been good has been worked on by a group and revised a million times. And if they want to create something that is good, that they're proud of, they should do that. I know we're out of time. Thank you for sticking around. I understand if you have to leave. I get it. So I'm just trying to get through the last ones of these. I would love to see a basic model of how this works. Thank you for being willing to share. It really is freeing. I mean, it's really, this is the best thing I've ever done as an instructor. I've done things that I thought were really improvements in my teaching. Flipping my course was a big improvement. And focusing on metacognition and tilt. All those things were things that I really thought, hey, I'm improving my instruction. But it's the most important thing I've ever done, because it really does get at, it shifts the focus to the things that I think, that we all think are the important things in our courses, right? Those student learning outcomes, we put at the beginning in our syllabus, and we talk about maybe in the first day, and then I just forgot about as I started to play my game of school for the rest of the semester. I never went back to those, and that was my mistake. But this puts them front and center, and I can never forget about them, because everything is based on the benefits. And those benefits are talked about in the student learning outcomes. And so it all comes back to that. And that's what I want, every day, every minute of my course to be about those things. And every minute that my students are thinking about grades and points and scores is a minute they're not thinking about the benefits. And so this just centers those things in a way that nothing I've done before has done. So it's the most important, most meaningful change I've done in my teaching in 25 years of doing it. So yeah, that's what I would say about it. Student empowerment, love to see a PLC on this. We're doing one right now, and Travis Martin and I are doing it. And so we're halfway through it now, but maybe we'll do it again, and there's always more room. And as you can tell, I'm really an evangelist for this, so I'm going to keep on pushing it in ways large and small. So I'm happy to talk with you about this if you want to meet one-on-one about it, or you want me to, I don't know, come to your department meeting. Love to do that, or your college meeting, or anything. I'll go anywhere, talk to anybody about this at any time, because I think it's important. So thank you all for being here. Anybody have any other questions you want to speak up, or anything else?
There's one question by Marsha. I assume you're gonna, can you send me the syllabus and I'll email it with the session survey?
Yes, if you put your email in the chat, then I will copy it and I will send it to you as soon as I possibly can. Anything else?
I would like to follow up with you.
Yes.
I really do buy into all of